Long before anyone called him Wild Bill, he was simply James Butler Hickok, a farm boy growing up in Illinois in the 1830s and 1840s. The frontier was moving west, and his family lived close to its shifting edge. Like many young Americans of his time, James felt pulled toward adventure. Stories of open ranges, stage lines, and new towns on the prairie were more exciting than the steady rhythm of farm chores. As a teenager, he left home for the Kansas frontier, a region that was already violent and divided over slavery. It was a place where reputations and tempers could flare quickly. James found work as a teamster and stage driver, handling horses, freight, and passengers across rough trails. The job demanded steady nerves, a good eye, and a steady hand on a revolver just in case. A violent confrontation in Kansas accounts differ on the details, left a man dead, and James convinced that staying in town might bring revenge or arrest. He slipped quietly away, already learning how fast the frontier could turn deadly. Somewhere along the line, people began calling him Bill instead of James, perhaps confusing him with other Hickocks, perhaps because the name simply fit the rugged image forming around him. The wild in Wild Bill came from stories of his temper and his courage. Friends and enemies alike described him as daring, sometimes reckless, and absolutely unwilling to back down once a line had been crossed. Witnesses remembered Hickok as tall, long-haired, and quiet, with eyes that seemed to watch every doorway and every hand near a holster. On a frontier where danger could come from any corner, that watchfulness kept him alive. By the late 1850s, Hickok had become one of many frontier men who knew the trails, the towns, and the tensions of the borderlands. His story, though, was about to be swept up into a much bigger conflict, the American Civil War. When war came in 1861, the whole country split, and so did the frontier. Men like Hickok suddenly found their skills in high demand, not for stage lines or small-town quarrels, but for scouting, spying, and fighting for the Union. During the Civil War, Hickok served the Union in a variety of roles: teamster, scout, and sometimes spy. The same frontier instincts that kept him alive in Kansas were now turned toward tracking enemy movements. Scouts rode ahead of the main columns, studying trails, water sources, and signs of enemy forces. It was dangerous, lonely work that required sharp eyes, steady nerves, and quick decisions at the edge of enemy territory. After the war, tales of Hickok's wartime encounters and later gunfights spread quickly. Some stories began with real events, others grew taller every time they were retold around a campfire or in a newspaper office. One early famous incident was the McCanley's fight at Rock Creek Station, where Hickok and others killed several attackers in a tense confrontation. Later dime novels turned it into a one-man stand, making Hickok bigger than life. In frontier towns, a reputation could be as powerful as any law code. Stories about Hickok's accuracy and nerve meant that some men backed down rather than test him, while others were drawn to him looking for a challenge. Eastern newspapers loved tales from the West. A few dramatic articles about Wild Bill turned him into a national name, presenting him as a perfect frontier, hero fearless, deadly, and somehow always on the side of justice. In reality, the line between fact and fiction was already blurry. Some gunfights happened as described, others were exaggerated or entirely invented. Hickok's legend was growing faster than anyone could keep track of the truth. For Hickok himself, living inside that legend meant constant scrutiny. Every move he made in a saloon or on a street could end up in someone's story, and he knew it. As the Civil War ended, the plains filled with cattle drives, railroad crews, and former soldiers looking for work. It was a world full of opportunity and danger for men who knew how to ride, shoot, and track. By the time the frontier boom was in full swing, the name Wild Bill Hickok meant something. In some places it meant safety, in others it meant trouble was not far away. Hickok first made his name as a lawman in Hays City, Kansas, a rough cow town where gunfire and drunken brawls were common. His job was to keep order without being swallowed by the chaos. As marshal, Hickok believed in making quick, decisive moves. Supporters said he cleared out dangerous troublemakers. Critics said he was too quick to use deadly force. In Abilene, another booming cow town, Hickok stepped into an even larger spotlight. Longhorn herds arrived by the thousands, and saloons overflowed with cowboys eager to spend their pay. Night after night, Hickok had to confront armed and drunken men who believed the tales about their own toughness. Most backed down when they saw his calm stare and his ready hands. The more famous Hickok became, the more men wanted to prove themselves against him. A single wrong move, a misunderstood gesture, or a drunken boast could spiral into a gunfight in seconds. In one chaotic incident, Hickok accidentally shot and killed a friend while firing at a suspect. The tragedy haunted him and showed the terrible risk of using guns in tight, crowded conditions. Between political pressure, business interests worried about violence, and that painful mistake, Hickok eventually lost his position as marshal. Town leaders wanted a calmer image than their famous, dangerous lawman could provide. Years of tension took a toll. Friends said Hickok grew more cautious, more tired, and less quick to joke. He had survived many confrontations, but each carried a weight that did not fully leave him. Without a badge to wear, Hickok drifted again, taking work as a gambler, scout, and occasional law officer. The frontier was changing, though, and his kind of lawman was already becoming a figure of the past. Even as he moved from place to place, the stories did not slow down. Newspapers and travelers carried tales of Wild Bill Hickok to cities that he would never see, making him famous far beyond the plains. By the time his days as a marshal were behind him, Hickok was already something unusual, a man who had to live inside a legend that the world had built around him, half true and half fantasy. In the 1870s, showman Buffalo Bill Cody invited Hickok to perform in a traveling Wild West show. On stage, Wild Bill was expected to play himself, only louder, faster, and more dramatic than real life. By most accounts, Hickok was not a natural actor. He mumbled lines and sometimes refused to repeat exaggerated scenes. The crowds wanted a legend. He still remembered the real fear behind those stories. Cheap dime novels spread lurid tales of Wild Bill's adventures to readers all over the country. These booklets turned gunfights into epic duels and everyday quarrels into grand melodramas. Fame brought money and attention, but it also brought strain. Hickok's eyesight was reportedly failing, and age was catching up with him, even as posters still showed a young, unbeatable gunfighter. Eventually, Hickok left the show circuit. Performing the same embellished scenes night after night was not the life he wanted. He drifted back toward the places he knew best: saloons, card tables, and frontier towns. By the mid-1870s, the Wild West itself was changing. Railroads, telegraphs, and growing towns brought more law and less open space, leaving men like Hickok unsure where they really fit. As word spread of gold in the Black Hills, Hickok and many others looked north. The boomtown of Deadwood in Dakota Territory promised new chances to win money at the tables, or lose it. Hickok's connection with Martha "Calamity Jane" Canary became part of the legend, too. Later stories overstated the romance. In reality, their relationship seems to have been complicated, part friendship and part tall tale. In 1876, Hickok joined wagon trains and stagecoaches rolling toward Deadwood, where miners, gamblers, and merchants were piling into a narrow valley with more dreams than solid plans. When Wild Bill Hickok stepped into Deadwood, people recognized him immediately. In a town full of dreamers and schemers, having a living legend at the poker table made the stories and the risks even bigger. Deadwood was technically illegal on land that still belonged to the Lakota people, but that did not stop miners and merchants. The town grew fast, with law arriving much slower than liquor, cards, and gold dust. In Deadwood, Hickok mostly made his living as a gambler. He moved from table to table, playing cards for stakes that could rise quickly in a town where some people struck it rich overnight. By 1876, Hickok's health was not what it had been. Contemporary accounts suggest his eyesight was failing, a dangerous weakness for a man whose survival had once depended on seeing trouble coming. Deadwood was small enough that everyone crossed paths. Miners, gamblers, and local toughs all shared the same handful of streets and saloons, building grudges and friendships in equal measure. At the card tables, tensions sometimes ran high. Disputes over debts, insults, and perceived slights could simmer quietly or flare into arguments that everyone in the room paid attention to. Hickok famously preferred to sit with his back to a wall so he could see the room. In Deadwood's number 10 saloon, some said he had to settle for a less secure seat, a decision that would become part of his legend. Among the men around Deadwood's tables was Jack McCall, a heavy drinker with debts and resentments. Accounts differ on exactly what passed between him and Hickok, but by August, tensions had clearly grown. One story claims that Hickok embarrassed McCall by paying for his losses and telling him to quit gambling. Whether true or not, McCall's wounded pride became a key part of the tale that followed. By early August 1876, Deadwood felt like a powder keg, crowded, noisy, and full of stories. No one knew it yet, but the town was about to become famous for a single shot fired in a crowded saloon. On August 2, 1876, Hickok took his usual seat at a poker table inside the number 10 saloon. The game was routine, but the combination of his position, his enemies, and the crowded room set the stage for what came next. That day, Jack McCall entered the number 10 saloon carrying a revolver. He moved quietly through the crowd toward the table where Hickok sat with his back turned, engrossed in the game. McCall stepped close behind Hickok and fired a single shot into the back of his head. In an instant, the most famous gunfighter in the West was killed without a chance to draw. The saloon exploded into chaos. Players dove for cover, chairs toppled, and shouts filled the smoky room as people realized that Wild Bill Hickok had been shot dead at the table. Later stories claimed that Hickok's final hand showed 2 pairs aces and 8s forever, labeled the dead man's hand. Whether or not the cards were exactly that, the image stuck in Western folklore. McCall attempted to flee into the street but was quickly captured by stunned and angry townspeople. In a town that had just lost its most famous resident, justice would be demanded. Deadwood held an informal trial with a hastily assembled jury. McCall claimed he had killed Hickok to avenge an earlier wrong against his brother, and remarkably, that first jury acquitted him. Because Deadwood sat on unorganized territory, the first trial's legality was doubtful. When McCall bragged about the killing in other towns, federal authorities rearrested him and brought him to proper court. In Yankton, Dakota Territory, McCall was tried again this time in a formal territorial court. He was found guilty of murdering Wild Bill Hickok and sentenced to death. Hickok's death was sudden, unfair, and in many ways ordinary for a violent frontier. Yet because of who he was, the killing turned into one of the most famous murders in Western history. The dramatic scene of a legendary gunfighter shot from behind at a poker table was too powerful for storytellers to resist. It froze Wild Bill Hickok in time as the hero who never saw his last enemy coming. In Deadwood, people told and retold stories of Wild Bill's short time in town. Guides pointed out the saloon and hilltop grave, turning his life and death into a local industry of memory. Calamity Jane later claimed she had been Hickok's close companion, even his wife according to some tales. Historians doubt the marriage, but her stories helped bind their names together in Western lore. When Calamity Jane died years later, she was buried near Hickok in Deadwood Cemetery, ensuring that visitors would forever link their lives, however tangled the truth really was. In the 20th century, Wild Bill Hickok appeared in movies, television shows, and comic books. Each adaptation twisted the details a little more, but kept the same core image: long hair, twin pistols, and a fearless stare. Modern historians have tried to separate the real Hickok from the legend. They sift through records, letters, and eyewitness accounts, comparing them to the exaggerated stories that made him famous. It is clear that Hickok was indeed a skilled marksman, a capable scout, and a lawman who faced real danger. It is also clear that he made mistakes, felt fear, and lived with the consequences of violence in ways that legends often skip. Today, Wild Bill Hickok stands as a symbol of a certain version of the West: dramatic gunfights at high noon, solitary lawmen facing down chaos, and a world where courage and violence were never far apart. But the real West was also full of families, workers, native nations, and ordinary people simply trying to live their lives. Hickok's story is only one thread in a much larger and more complicated fabric. Studying Hickok's life shows how stories about violence, fame, and justice take shape, and how they can overshadow the quieter truths beneath. It also shows how quickly a single moment can define how a person is remembered. Our tiny storytellers remind us that Wild Bill Hickok was both a real person and a legendary character, shaped by his choices and by the stories others told about him. Understanding both the man and the myth helps us see the Wild West more clearly, with all its danger, drama, and imagination. In the end, Wild Bill's life and death have become more than a campfire tale. They are a window into how America remembers the frontier, mixing memory and myth, danger and romance, until the story itself becomes part of history.